Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Sex Sells podcast, the podcast where we talk about culture, relationships, society, and dating from a male and female perspective. Really tackling a significant topic today, the absence of religion and its consequences, its societal, social, even individual consequences. But before we get into that, let's just have a chat. How are you, Eliza? You good?
I'm good. I'm getting there. I'm tired, but
Yeah.
overall good.
So Remy's still a bit ill. Or he had his vaccinations, you said?
Yeah, which is so
So he's
fun.
microchipped?
Yeah, probably. Yeah, that's really about it. It's just
Bill Gates controls him now?
Yeah,
Bit of
something like
mind
that.
control?
Hopefully now at least he's protected from the measles.
Yeah.
I don't even know what they injected. I literally didn't even check what the vaccinations were for, but my friend has a baby, and because he's in daycare and he kept getting sick and sick and sick, she kept delaying. You're not allowed to get vaccinations when you're unwell because it makes you a bit more unwell.
Mm-hmm.
And because he was constantly sick, she started getting like letters from the government, emails, calls, like all these things about like basically saying medical neglect because she hadn't vaccinated her child at 6 months, but she was only like, it was like 7 weeks late or something. It's pretty like, I thought that, you know, it was, I mean, not morally, but I thought that it was legally fine to be an anti-vaxxer.
Yeah.
But now I'm like, what happens? I actually don't know. And I haven't ever come across that working in child protection. So I don't know.
Is it true that I know nurses come and see new mothers every now and again, but is it true that they teach you about sex positivity and they teach you how to raise a good way to raise the children into a sex positive environment, or is that just something else?
No,
Okay.
I mean, I had all the like aftercare and actually had more nurses coming for a longer amount of time than usual. And I engaged with like the community health center. I probably did more than the average mom in terms of post-birth engagement with nurses. No one's ever said anything like that.
Oh, well.
But they talk about a safe house a lot. I got asked like 30 different times in my pregnancy, have I experienced abuse, emotional manipulation, all these things over and over again, and a lot of surveys on my mental health and how I was coping and all these things. So they're very on that, which is great, I think. Yeah.
It's a lot, isn't it? It's
Yeah.
Well, this could be a good segue into the topic because it's a lot and it's all from the government, whereas I suppose historically it would have been a family around you, an extended family that would have been helping the new mother and the new parents and checking in on the new parents.
Yeah.
So it is different when it's from the government, and you know, I'm sure these nurses are all wonderful people, and it's still it's a bit impersonal. It's their job to do that, and there'd be some nurses with stress on a Friday, and you know, are they going to do as good a job as an aunt, an uncle, a cousin, a sister, a brother? What do you think about something like that? Do you think? Because I know you've been raising Remy pretty much. I don't know how much help you've had from an extended family network. Do you think it's better, you know, all things considered, if you have an extended family network to help raise a young baby, or?
Yeah, I do think it is. I think that it does take a village for most people, and like I have that accessible to me. My mum's offered to nanny or babysit for a couple of days a week if I work, and so has my mother-in-law, and they come and visit all the time. But I haven't taken them up on that offer because I'm like, I don't need it. And my mother-in-law is always like, I'll come babysit and you can just rest. And I'm like, I don't need it. It's fine. You can still come see him and hang out with him alone or whatever, but like you don't have to do it for my sake. But I know that a lot of mums are really envious of that and say like, I wish that I had someone offering to help me or be involved. Or so often I see on a Facebook group of babies that were born in the same month as Remy, people saying like no one remembered his birthday, no one gave us anything for Christmas last year, like no one's come to visit. And it's I gave birth 3 months ago. My parents live 20 minutes away and they haven't even met him. Like a lot of that, really a lot of sadness about that. So I think that innately most women or people that have given birth would crave that community sense. I was definitely an outlier in that I didn't, because I was just for like months, the first like 6 months, I was literally breastfeeding 24/7. Like it was constant. I didn't want to go out. I couldn't drive anywhere. I couldn't do anything because I was breastfeeding. So when people were like, I'll take him out, and I'm like, what, for 30 minutes until he wants to be fed again? I can't do it. Did you see my Instagram post the other day? And it was like, because I counted feeds. I fed in 11 months, I fed Remy over 4,000 times.
Jesus.
Isn't that crazy? 700 hours I spent feeding Remy, breastfeeding Remy in 11 months. It's pretty crazy.
That's crazy. That's a lot.
Yeah. Yeah. God,
be a big boy.
Yeah. Yeah.
So this reminds me of something actually, Louise Perry, and first I want to come back to that and get your thoughts if you finish the book as well. But she talked about how traditionally there was a point where once a woman's given birth, she goes somewhere else and rests for 30 days, and then the extended family in the village care for the baby. And then that was always interpreted as a sort of sexist thing where we're just got to, relegate the dirty woman who's just given birth and her body has changed, and we've got to sort of take her away for a while, when her interpretation of it was saying, well, she just needs a rest. Her body's gone through a traumatic situation and she just needs time to recuperate and rest, and allow the extended family network to raise the baby. What do you think about not just that, but just some of the societal norms that, and we'll get into religion eventually, but some of the societal norms that we no longer have, that have forced us all to become a bit more individualistic and maybe just rational about a lot of these, and rely sometimes on the government a little bit more. Broad question, so, take your time, but what are your thoughts on that?
I guess to go to your last point first before it exits my head, I think that there's a lot of pros and cons to being individualistic, because I did find that I had a lot of nurses involved with me post-birth, which I thought, and I gave birth through the public system, which I won't do again. But I will say, like, the amount of support that government provided me was phenomenal, and there was so much available to me. They come to my house every single day. Then they connected me to a centre that's like down the road, I didn't know existed. I can go in any day of the week, get help. I can see pediatricians, where usually that would take years. Anyway, so I think that that's really important. But the other thing is as well, when you're talking about like that, talking about sex positivity or whatever, and that education aspect, I really, really struggled, because every single time I saw a nurse, everyone would tell me something different, and vastly different, and it would give me so much anxiety. Your baby has jaundice. He's not jaundice. You don't have milk. He's eating too much. He's eating too little. He needs to be on formula and breastfeeding, like all these things. I was a mess, because I was like, I have a tiny newborn in my hand and everyone's telling me something different on what to do, and it was so confusing. So maybe, but then again, I was going to say maybe it'd be better to have just one. But what if I got the one that was telling me all these things that weren't true? Because I had a nurse coming out every day, and she told me, so basically, I'm going to talk about boobs for a bit, but when you get like breast milk and you put a pump on your boob to get milk out so you can get it in a bottle, when you've just given birth, their tummies are the size of like a Malteser. So it's normal to only get like 20 mils of milk out. But my nurse was looking at this bottle with a centimetre of milk at the bottom, saying, oh my God, you don't have milk. You need to be topping up with formula. This is crazy. Then the next day, a nurse comes in and she was like, why are you feeding him so much? You're putting him on the boob, plus giving him express breast milk, plus then giving him formula. You're overfeeding him. He'll be in so much pain. His tummy's too small for that, blah, blah, blah. And then I was like, I'm not getting milk. I've been told I don't have milk. I was on medication for it. Every single nurse that came over was squeezing my boobs to see how much milk was coming out. And then finally, they sent out a lactation consultant, like a specialist. And she was like, yeah, which is like a full like qualified job, and they're very expensive too. And she was like, honey, everything's fine. Just pop them on the boob. That's it. Every 2 hours. Just get
So that first nurse got it wrong.
Yeah, they all got it wrong. They all were like putting me on medication. I spent $1,000 on different pumps because she was like, this one's not medical grade. It has to be a hospital grade pump to get more milk. And I just didn't know that much milk is not expected until a few weeks later or months later. Actually, I never even got to that much, but clearly Remy was in the 99th percentile for weight. Like, clearly he was getting enough. He was a huge boy. But yeah, it was just very different, and it was so confusing. So I think that I don't know if it would have been better to have like the family surrounding me at that time or whatever. And my family did really want to come and be involved, but I was so so fatigued and exhausted, and my recovery, I had a C-section. My recovery was so rough. And the first time my friend came to visit me, sorry, TMI, this is a bit gross. She came to visit me and I was so drugged out. Like, I was on the heaviest painkillers. I couldn't even see her. I was just holding my baby. I hadn't slept in since he's been born. And
surely they'd understand, they're not coming to visit you thinking they're going to get a normal social conversation.
Yeah. And then, and I literally bled all over my yellow couch, like excessively. And she just cleaned it up for me. It was great. And then my other friend came, and she brought her fiance, who I really love, but it was so hard to be like, okay, I'm sitting here like topless, breastfeeding, like I can't think about it. It just was too much for me to be. I just wanted to be alone, basically. But that is a thing as well. Like, I actually know of a girl, or I know a few women that have had babies, and it's like for 42 days or 40 days maybe, I think, they stay at home, and they have the mother-in-laws and their mum and dad stay with them, or either one of them, and they don't leave the house. They don't even do a walk. They literally don't. And I don't know if it's just cultural or religious belief for that, but a lot of it also is they believe that you don't want to expose your baby to all these things while they're so tiny until 40 days, and they've slightly better developed immune systems or whatever. So I do know people that do that. And then I can't remember the rest of your questions now. But
I can't remember it, but I think it was just a broad segue into I suppose would you have preferred it? It's very hard to answer something like this, but if there was a hypothetical extended family network or community network that could have taken care of Remy while you were away somewhere for the first week or two or something like that.
I have been seeing that I believe it's Korea, and it's becoming quite popular where they get a nurse, and I don't know if it's a nurse or a doula or just a caretaker or whatever, and it's really cheap. It's government subsides most of it, and they pay about $200 American or whatever equivalent, and someone comes and lives in their home with them. That's not a family member, so you don't have to deal with family dynamics for like 2 weeks or 2 to 4 weeks. They cook all your food for you, and she shows like these beautiful, amazing Asian dishes. They show her cleaning, then she's carrying the baby around, giving mum a break, and it's literally provided by government. It's amazing. And I saw it and I was like, God, that would be so good. But then also I was like, I couldn't handle, like, I just had a baby, and I was like, I was obsessed. I still am. But like, I was like, I don't want other people looking after him and carrying him. I could barely even hand him to Adrian. I just wanted him to myself for a bit. So to see, like, she says, she does most of the care. Like, she feeds him or she changes his nappies. Like, I think some women that would be a godsend. No, maybe not for everyone, but I'm sure like you could say, like, can you just clean my house instead? And then I've also seen something similar, and I think this is also in Korea, where they have like a private hospital experience, but it's not a hospital, sorry, it's a hotel, a post-birth hotel that you stay in for 1 to 2 weeks after you leave hospital, and it's just like very luxurious. Food gets delivered to you. They're
trying everything in Korea.
Yeah, it's really interesting.
Because they are really ahead on that low fertility curve.
Yeah.
And it's not working. There's still not many people having children there, but that sounds very interesting.
Yeah, and it's been really, I mean, for those that are having kids, it's been really well received, and every video I've seen on it has been saying like it's just been the greatest thing and so much support. And I didn't even know about how like mothers group or play groups work around the Central Coast. No one, or even Sydney, no one told me. And then I was looking up like play groups on Central Coast on Google, and there was nothing. And it wasn't until I spoke to a nurse on the very last day, which most like people don't have this nurse come out for that often. And she was like, by the way, you can call the center and they add you into a mother's group for 6-week-old babies or whatever. And I was like, oh, wow. And then every time I met a mum after that was local at the park or whatever, I always asked them, like, did you go to the community health centre? Did you join a mother's group? And they're like, I didn't know that was a thing. In fact, the other day, actually, I met a guy at the park. He was there with his kids, same age as Remy. They were getting along really well. Dad was really nice. And he told me that they had moved up from Wollongong and they didn't know anyone here. She's, I'm just going to give her career away. There's probably too much information, but she has gone back to work part-time. She's got a 1-year-old, don't have any friends, don't have family up here, don't know anyone. Mum's a bit lonely, whatever. And I was like, oh my God, I'll see her, take my name and number and give it to her. And I never heard I never heard from her, which is kind of sad. And then I was telling my mother's group and they were like, yeah, if my husband came home with some woman's number that he met at the park, I would not be messaging it either. And I was like, oh, okay, fair. That was a micro-cheating example.
Yeah,
not that I was micro-cheating.
Okay, well, I guess maybe bringing it back to the topic of this podcast, religion, do you think, not just with religion, but it's a certain cultural code or a religious code that really values family and birth and motherhood, do you think that is also a huge incentive for women to want to have children, but also a way that it can sort of ameliorate the existential crisis many millennials feel, which is, okay, do I actually want to have kids? What do I need to do? We're inundated with these big existential questions, which were formally answered for us by, more often than not, religion. So I know you've had, various thoughts on that. And from an external perspective, it does seem like today, particularly in cosmopolitan areas, women have this kind of existential thought track going on as well. Do I have the kids? I'm doing really well in my career, all of these sorts of things. So do you think we lack something like that previously religion gave us, which is just the clear pathway of what to do?
Yeah, yes and no, because I would say, like, prior to having a baby myself, I did not like receiving messages like that about how your life will find meaning when you have a child and this and that. And I feel like it actually turns women off having kids at some points where it's like, okay, so I'm just a baby creating machine or whatever, blah, blah, blah. And even though I don't feel that religion glorifies it that much because the disadvantages to women are so significant, even in Australia where we get paid like 18 weeks leave. That's only if you'd worked for a full year, full time at a job. I don't know what happens if you hadn't prior to that. I feel like there are so many disadvantages. Like, say, even me, Adrian and I were engaged, but we're not yet married. As far as I'm concerned, we're not doing a prenup. Maybe we will, I don't know. I actually even talked about it. But I'm sacrificing. I've been off for a year. I want to take another year off work and I want to have more future children. How many years have I sacrificed in my superannuation fund that I don't get access to that money? What happens if we split up? And I had lost 4 years of income across, if I have 2 children, plus 4 years of superannuation, all these things. And I feel like a lot of women are saying, like, childbearing can be such a disadvantage to women and there's such a load to carry on with your career, the household, the management, and wanting to be equal standing with men. If people feel that babies prohibit that and being like, I don't want to be stuck at home 24/7 with a child. I don't want to lose my identity. And it does happen. As much as, like, some people say like, oh, it doesn't change your identity. It does. Like my whole fucking identity feels like it's about my child. But that has been something that I actually find that I really, really enjoy. Like this is the part that I struggle with internally, is that I actually do understand now when people are like, oh, when you have kids, this is how you'll feel, like, blah, blah, blah. And I would be like, shut up. Now I feel that way. Like now I'm like, oh my God, this is the greatest thing that has ever happened to me, hands down. I'm going to do it a billion times over. Like this is just so magical to me. I love motherhood. And then, yeah, there's that ethical kind of like, well, I can see, yeah, the both sides of the coin for that. And I don't necessarily think that religion is going to offer that sense of direction or motivation or deep, even just having a deeper meaning, like I'm creating more children for God or whatever to allow into his kingdom. I don't know. But yeah, I don't think so. But anyway, I guess to put it in a nutshell as well, like the reason why Neil and I were coming across this topic in particular was just thinking about how what is the impact of that absence of religion what do we take meaning from in our life now? And especially when people that aren't having children, good, fair enough, whatever, but is having a successful career giving these individuals enough meaning and purpose in their life for utter fulfillment? And a lot of researchers, philosophers, academics are coming out and saying that without religion, millennials and Gen Z are going to struggle so much because it's actually something that is needed within a community. And when I looked up before, I was looking up why religion is needed. That's just the simplest search, whatever. And it was all young people on TikToks talking about how religion is so bad and so detrimental and we need to be stepping away from it, and really like anti-religion, like all these videos I was coming across. And by the way, I'm not religious. I don't believe in anything.
The one you sent me wasn't. It was. She was. What was it? She studied philosophy or something.
Yeah, she was saying the opposite.
Sort of touching on Nietzsche's idea that there's now a lot of existential dread because we don't have that existential meaning that often comes from religion.
Yeah, exactly. And she was saying that there is now a loss within us, in our psyche, emotional, whatever, community as well, without religion, because we don't have a lot of traditions, rites of passage, scriptures at school, church on Sundays. We don't engage with these things. Having a child go to a Baptist school, places of worship, ritual that was so essential to humans to connect with community, connect to a higher being or higher meaning, and feel that life has purpose. So she's talking about the essence of nihilism, where you feel that you reject religion and you feel that life has no proper meaning, is, she believed, directly linked to higher rates of suicide, depression, anxiety, and feeling at a loss, and more people questioning, well, what's the point?
I agree.
Why are we here?
I agree with her 100%. And I think the big question that we have to answer is, how do we fill that religion-shaped hole? Because a lot of people are still discouraged at the idea of organized religion as they currently stand. Then the question becomes, how do you fill that hole on a community level, on a national level? And I think that question is even more important than how do we mollify the effects of climate change. Or they are the two biggest questions to face this century. I would even put that one as bigger. I really think that one's vastly important. And I think certain secular creeds have attempted to fill that void. So nihilism might be one of them, and then nihilism can often come hand in hand with hedonism. So let's just try to maximize our pleasure as much as possible and create these sort of rational justifications of it. Social justice, though there are some obviously necessary foundations of that, it has morphed into a religious style
Yes. Yeah.
of ideas. And there's a wonderful book by an academic called, mind blanking on his name, but it's called John McWhorter, and it's called Woke Racism. And he talks about how much of the ideas of modern social justice can actually be traced to a very similar Protestant Christian theory of being, that there's this sort of original sin based on your privilege, and it's your job to see the truth and be awoken, I woke to that truth. And anyone who questions that, even if those questions are somewhat valid, they're actually questioning the truth and challenging you and actually solidifying this sort of evil world that currently exists. And it's a fascinating book, and I vehemently recommend it to everyone. Woke Racism by John McWhorter. And if it helps, he's an African-American academic. New Age spirituality is filling the void as well. Crystals and meditation. And look, I'm all for that. I think in moderate doses, I love all of that.
Yeah.
Well, not the star signs, but that's you. You like that sort of stuff. But the big one would be social justice. That seemingly, and you look at sort of the ads that we have now, they have almost a religious-like feel to them. When you see, I've seen ads for McDonald's and KFC where someone's announcing to her family that she's pregnant, and there's this beautiful piano playing, and then it has the M at the end, and you think, this is weird. This is almost trying to tap into our really deep psychology where we're yearning for some sort of deeper meaning. And, what are we going to do? Fill that with Big Macs? But right now, probably.
Well, actually, yes.
Yeah.
That's what we are doing, indulging.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So
it's the era of indulgent. Yeah.
Decadence. There we go. Thought about the Roman Empire. All right. So I think that is the question of our time. How do we fill the religion-shaped hole without actually turning towards the religion that many of us have decided is no longer fit for the world as we understand it today?
So this researcher, I should get her name actually because we keep referencing her, but she provided some suggestions for that. And basically she said what you were just saying, that one thing that's really important and that has been really helpful and great is finding meaning through activism. And you're so right when you talked about that social justiceness, and it does very much feel at some points like a religious community. Like when I was really into like the vegan community, I'm still vegan, but when I was involved with the vegan community, I went to vegan events, I had vegan friends, I had a vegan housemate, and Earthling Ed was like everyone's fucking god because he was so well spoken and he had so much evidence and blah, blah, blah. And literally he has like a cult following, this guy, because there's nothing extreme about him. He was just a nice, gentle, you can look him up, calm guy that would sit and talk to people out in the park and be like, what are your thoughts on this? Yep, fair enough. Did you know this? And it was literally like a religious following. So I do think that and she's, to be honest, she is saying this is what she recommends, not going vegan, but finding an activism, finding something that you can find further meaning in outside of your bubble. And it's amazing like what people are so in their own center of their world and they ignore or forget about everything outside of them, or they don't involve themselves with the community, they don't do volunteer work, they don't do these things. And you forget about it, like, gosh, when I hear people say, like, even when I just talk about my work sometimes, people are like, you just forget the world is really like that. You don't even know that. And I'm like, well, not if you volunteered, not if you did like one day in a soup kitchen or whatever. Like there's so many opportunities to involve yourself in those things and learn about them and find a meaning. Like you have the resources. Maybe you have a purpose here to do some good. Maybe that's going to be the meaning. The other thing she said as well was
Can I jump in real quickly?
Yeah.
I do have to say I've got a few points of disagreement with her because I think we've seen when people make those secular points of activism into a religious type creed, it can get to a point where it actually makes things worse, and
it's like a
becomes a
cult.
self-fulfilling prophecy where if you think that this is an irredeemably evil system that we live in, you act in a way that manifests that. And I think we have to be very wary about making things like that into a religion, into a point of meaning, and into a point of personal identity. Because once something becomes a personal identity, as soon as you hear contradictory points, you're just immediately going to rationalize why that person is not only wrong, but why that person is actually immoral. And we've all been in a conversation with someone like that. And I don't think it's actually healthy. And I don't think it's actually what is going to best benefit the cause that we ultimately all want to achieve, which is as much equality of opportunity for all people. And I think it actually can make things worse.
I think so. I 100% agree with you, even just on a psychological level, like thinking about when I was like passionate about, and I still am, but like really passionate about the environment and veganism, all these things, I was like, so frustrated and so lost every day thinking, why aren't we doing things? Like the world's fucking ending. Like everything's gone to shit. All this technology and stuff, like it's really depressing. And I was like, actually I'm much happier to live in ignorance, which is shameful. Like now I get myself educated and have the knowledge of it, but I don't, for my sake, I don't go out and fight all those battles feeling like I have to have this huge voice in the world to advocate for those things, because it just was like, it felt, I don't know, fruitless at points. Like I'm like, well, I don't want to be fixating on what the world is missing all the time.
And it's not only that, because once you've made it a personal identity, you then engage in a level of confirmation bias where you're only looking at evidence that makes it seem like it is an existential emergency. And look, in a lot of these situations, I'm not saying that it may not be an emergency, but you are incentivized and inclined to see things that could potentially be a lot worse than they practically are, because then that fulfills your desire to be the savior. And I see that a lot in race relations where there's the concept of the white savior, and someone will really try to hone in on a person of color about how much of a victim they are so that they can feel a sense of righteousness in saving them. And the deep irony of that is they become often quite racist in the way that they're talking down to the person of color. And that is what I've experienced a lot particularly in the arts industry. I mean, that's really rife with those types. But I think that's where a lot of my ideas about how the extreme conception of these creeds can actually be much more harmful than they are beneficial.
100%. And the same as well, like a massive example is the disability community. And there's something called the social model of disability, where basically, in essence, it's that when we are constantly pitying and feeling so sorry for someone because they're in a wheelchair and thinking, oh, I must drop a lasagna over, they don't have legs or whatever, or they're disabled. You're thinking you're being altruistic, but actually you're insulting someone's autonomy and sense of purpose by thinking they're much more disadvantaged than me. I should feel sorry for them. Like in the sense that when, who was it? Was it Tony Abbott, I think? No. I don't know, but basically, I can't remember, it was years ago, but someone said they had an autistic son. Oh, it was Kevin Rudd. And he was like, I'm sorry to hear that. And she was like, why? Like, don't be sorry. Like, a lot of people have autism. A lot of people are neurotypical. But when you're actually advantaging the community further by acting as though it's something that is so sad and debilitating and needs to be looked at with pure compassion all the time. Like, yeah, people that are in wheelchairs can also be dickheads.
There's a lot of, it is a sort of pseudo-religious signaling when you see, particularly in corporate environments where there are a lot of, whether it's, the welcome to countries or it's the marketing campaigns, or it's the constant imagery that's saying we are inclusive, we are diverse, we are this, that. And I think it fills those people with a sense of purpose, because especially if you work at if you work in an oil company, if you work in any sort of major corporation, I'm guessing there may be a sense of spiritual void in what you do. Whereas I'm sure if you work as a nurse, or if you work in a profession like you did, you can always fall back on the fact that, okay, when my work gets stressful, look at what I'm doing. I'm doing something quite meaningful. And I wonder if deep down people who, I don't know, do the marketing for Coca-Cola or something know that it is relatively meaningless, spiritually meaningless what they're doing. And so they latch on to those things and they say, okay, on every Coke can, we've got to put this symbol, we've got to put this indigenous art, we've got to do this. And then it gives them a sense of purpose rather than, is that actually what is helping the cause that we all want to help?
Yeah. It's my brother literally works in advertising for Coca-Cola.
And then you said he left, didn't he?
Yeah, he's leaving. He's like, it's just not like feeling good for him. So yeah, it's so true. And I saw on Reddit around the time of NAIDOC week, where it was on the Ask an Australian Reddit, and it was like Indigenous people of Reddit. How do you feel about people putting up all the signs everywhere, all the acknowledgements of countries, the speeches about it? In my work, I guess in child protection, it's particularly important considering the history of Australians' child protection and the stolen generation. It's really important. But we do hours upon hours upon hours of training every year about the Indigenous community. We have people come in. We do acknowledgements of countries for every meeting. We have signs about what land we're on. We have to know what land we're on at all points, basically. And in some ways, actually, it was really beneficial because over 40% of the kids we worked with were Indigenous, and they didn't know anything about their history or their family lines, and we would find those things for them. But when Adrian's work on NAIDOC week, his big bosses or whatever had a meeting and were like, we need to do more because we haven't done anything yet. So Adrian was assigned with the task of it, and he came to me and he was like, you guys have done this a billion times. Like, what should I do? Should we do like an acknowledgement to country and their tradies? Should we have like a sign at the work? Should I put a poster up about NAIDOC week? Should we get like some food or whatever? And then I saw this post when I was looking it up. I saw this post on Reddit about it, and a lot of Indigenous people were saying like it feels so tokenistic that you do this for one day and then feel good, like cool, I've contributed. But what have you actually contributed other than acknowledging, that Indigenous people exist, and then do nothing else after that day or whatever? And then Adrian was talking about how they decided they were going to get an Indigenous man to come to their office and cook some, classic Indigenous food or whatever. And part of me was like, I wonder how that Indigenous man feels going into an office full of white men to cook food for them because it's NAIDOC week. But also good that during NAIDOC week you're putting your money to Aboriginal corporations and organisations. So I felt like there's two sides of the coin there. But it is like people will do things like that all the time, or donate $5 to this community, or post something on their Instagram and feel like I'm doing something really great here, but you're not. And sometimes you can be doing the opposite as well. Yeah,
and it comes back down to, I think, that religion-shaped hole where this is fulfilling a lust for spiritual meaning in a hyper-secularized world. And there are customs and traditions that are now emerging that are a sort of reincarnation of that particular culture's customs and traditions, but integrated into a weird, almost corporate sort of environment. And I wonder what will happen in the long term. But I also wonder how we can otherwise fill that void, with customs. And because I remember when I was a kid, we always sang the national anthem, and I think nationalism is it's similar to religion in it's a sort of greater collective idea that we're all a part of. And I doubt many schools sing the national anthem today, every day at an assembly. And just things like a daily ritual with prayer and customs and dress and dances, and that's something that many people just don't have, and I think they want, but they don't know how to get that.
Yeah, exactly. And it's like, think about Christmas and Easter. They are religious events, but it's that traditional. It doesn't give us a sense of meaning, but it's a tradition that brings a lot of people closer together. That's so important and so essential, and people find so much enjoyment and meaning in it. And are there versions of that aren't religious? Like, where do we have rituals, and where do we have places of worship without religion? And what are the rites of passage if you're not going on walkabout, or if you're not going to become, I don't know how it works, you get baptized and then Holy Communion or whatever. What happens? What's the equivalent of that for people that aren't religious? And I think it's also important to acknowledge the reason why people stepping away from religion is because, one, they feel that it's unbelievable. Then what's the evidence? Or two, there's a lot of religious trauma associated with religion, restriction, rules, abuse, and especially trauma against the LGBTI community, of course.
Totally, and that's absolutely true. But I don't think we can have a collective consciousness and collective ideas that bond us all together without some form of rules. And what those rules are, I don't know, but say something like, originally, if you look at the very, and I'm not a religious scholar by any means, but some of those early things which are like, thou shalt not steal. Well, that's a good rule. And that could be a rule that is in any kind of new religion. And, with New Age spirituality or social justice, there are, in a way, rules to that. So, you have to check your privilege. You have to acknowledge that, and you have to do certain things. And I just don't think any kind of creed that bonds us together can be completely void of rules. I'm not saying that the rules that were in the previous creeds were good. In fact, I would say the opposite as well, which I think you'd agree with. Many of them.
Yeah.
Many of them were good. But I can't think we can have personal, unlimited personal freedom and then also gain a sense of belonging and community. I just don't think those two things can coexist.
I think, though, there are a lot of parallels between, we are in some ways bringing religion, psychology, well-being together. And this woman that talked about, she studied the impact of nihilism on millennials and Gen Z, and she wrote a lot of research papers about it. And she was saying one of the things that she recommends alongside, or that's a positive alongside activism, was the re-emergence of philosophy, and also the science of well-being, that people are so invested in improving their well-being and improving their psychology and understanding themselves more, whereas we know more about ourselves than ever before, which has been a really positive thing. And in some ways that has been an essence of finding meaning as well in our lives. And that's, that is a positive thing, I guess. But the parallels between New Age spirituality, all these self-help gurus and things like that, it's really fascinating to see like how we're anti-religion now, yet we idolize these people that are basically talking about religious values, especially like Buddhism and things like that. Like even my dad in the 90s was wildly popular because he wrote a book called The Little Book of Calm, and he would go all around the world doing conferences and group meditations to thousands and thousands of people, and people were mind blown about it. He was on TV, radio, blah, 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 all these things, made a lot of money. But it's like, well, meditation isn't new. Meditation is like one of the oldest existing traditions of time and of communities and religion and culture. But now, because it became trendy, it was
Yeah.
this whole movement, and we do get swept up in this like self-help, self-guru.
And things like effective altruism is a new one as well.
Yeah. But we are turning towards things. I do feel like people are seeking out these things, or if not, when we're not seeking out these spiritual aspects of ourselves, we're indulging ourselves with materialism, or we're being overindulgent. We have a sense of like emptiness, a lack of meaning. We're turning to pleasure. And another point that this woman made was we have such a numbing to death. Like people don't care about it. There's no meaning to it. Like whatever, who cares? And when there's no meaning to death, then what is the meaning to life?
And there's a podcaster called Andrew Sullivan, which I'm a big fan of, and he has a podcast called The Dishcast, and he has conversations with highly regarded figures in America on these very similar topics. And he's a gay man who's also a Catholic, and the way he sort of integrates those two things into his psyche and his personality is very interesting. And he made a really interesting point once, I think this was a few years ago maybe, but it stuck with me. And he was talking about how a large component of Christianity in particular is care for the downtrodden. But that can get to a point where it becomes bastardized, where there were times in Ireland where they would look down upon anyone who was even remotely successful. And as a result, it fostered a culture where people didn't even want to try to achieve and didn't want to try to work hard and make a lot of money because they thought, well, then I'm not going to get into heaven. And you can almost see a modern Australian conception of that in the idea of tall poppy syndrome. Now, there's some benefits to a culture of tall poppy syndrome, but I think some of the downsides are that, okay, people don't want to try to aim for something larger or grander because they could be called a dickhead by their mates at the pub. Yeah. Whereas you look at America, who were all the Protestant immigrants, they don't have that culture at all. They're all about success. And then the downside of that, without their sort of maybe some kind of tall poppy-esque culture embedded in their national psyche, is that you can have a lot of arrogance and a sort of celebrity-obsessed culture. But then because they have that Protestantism, and that's still a large part of the American national identity, they also have an ability to ameliorate some of those potential aspects of arrogance or obsession with success. And then he made the point to say that, okay, what we're seeing with many of these modern concepts of social justice and the more critical, and when I say critical, like the social justice that's predicated on critical theory rather than liberal social justice, which is all about the individual and affording the individual rights. Critical social justice is about how the collective society at large is in the prejudice or the discrimination is embedded into the norms and ideas of that society. In a weird way, you can almost have a similar idea or culture emerge where people are actually they're really hesitant to say that they may be privileged, or it may not be financial privilege here as it was with the Catholicism in Ireland, but it may be like, oh yeah, you talk to people like this who are like, oh, I am white, and I'm so ashamed of that, and just so you know, like and that's not. I don't think that's helpful. I don't think, obviously people shouldn't be going around saying like, yeah, I'm so proud to be white or whatever. But there's a bastardized version of this care for the downtrodden, which we see emerging in this pseudo-spiritual, pseudo-religious social justice culture. And then you look at things like mental illness, for example, which has now, we've done a lot of podcasts on this, where it then can become a part of someone's identity. And what we want to do with many types of mental illnesses is say like, all right, this is something you're dealing with and we want to acknowledge that and validate that, but here are the steps for you to get better and to improve. But even that can be seen as a form of attack or as an invalidation of someone's personal identity, because if you have a society that's very care-driven towards the downtrodden, which, again, this is all very nuanced because you don't want to have none of that at all, you can incentivize people subconsciously to amplify how oppressed or how downtrodden they are. And I actually saw someone on TikTok, it was a black man talking about, he said it in a very direct and abrupt way, and he was like, "Oh, all these modern ideas about mental illness and different identities about gender are just a way for white people to feel oppressed." And then it was stitched by a couple of people who were actually saying he said it in a pretty harsh way, but there may be some truth to that. And I think that's also another. It's a because again, it's really nuanced, and it's not something to discredit everything that we've achieved, but there are elements of that I think are true.
Yeah, that's an interesting theory. I definitely think there would be elements, but also like it's something that I feel I even want to be careful thinking about, or because you don't want to discredit like the LGBTI people or trans people, etc., being like, oh, you're just trying to find a way to become oppressed. But it is an interesting perspective, I guess, or an interesting theory or idea that could have definite elements of truth to it. Yeah, and people, I guess, it makes another point that people are finding meaning in being oppressed. And are people putting themselves intentionally into oppressed states so that they seek that, so that they receive that sense of, one, identity, and two, community and involvement that religion almost offers.
And that was one of Nietzsche's big criticisms of religion, where it was like, okay, you got to be careful not to fall in love with your suffering, because that's what religion does. It helps you deal with the pain of your suffering because there's a greater meaning and a purpose. But then the negative consequence of that is that it can make people actually develop an identity of like, yeah, this is me and I'm suffering, and that is forever how I will exist. And there are ramifications for an idea like that.
That's so interesting. Yeah.
But I also, I want to say, look, this is a very nuanced and delicate conversation to have. And it's not let's just get rid of this or get rid of that or bring this back and bring that back. There's got to be some sort of very finely tuned new ideas that emerge.
And the other thing as well is like you can understand why, like there's a trend going around on TikTok where people say all the time, I don't understand how people get sucked into cults, or I'm confident that if I were indoctrinated into a cult, I would recognize the warning signs and be able to leave, blah, blah, blah. But when you look at like what we've been talking about, you can understand why people do get sucked into cults.
Absolutely.
Because they're searching for a sense of meaning and connection and a higher purpose and a being to worship. And Adrian and I watching World's Toughest Prisons, whatever it's called, and like a lot of them love to go to church, even when they're not like religious. It's like something they do every single day. The inmates go and sit in the chapel in the prison, and it's so important to them and so meaningful to them, and it wasn't something they ever did prior to being in prison, but now it's like essential to them. So it is this innate desire to connect in those ways. Even like the last weekend I invited my friends over and their husbands or partners or whatever, and it was kind of sad, but the men and the women segregated. The boys are talking about sport, and we were sitting in a different room, and I was like, let's do tarot card readings. So there's 5 of us sitting around in a circle. It's like a women's circle. We're doing tarot card readings all for each other, and we're all therapists, we're all psychologists, whatever, like highly professional, not that spiritual people or whatever. And it was such a nice moment. And when it's not like we were thinking like, thank you, angels, for sending me this message, but it was an interesting analysis on what we interpreted from whatever. So I just thought that was so funny, like how, and afterwards we were like, oh my God, I feel so good. And then we all kept messaging afterwards being like, today was so nice, and it was like so special and blah, blah, blah. Like, and it kind of was like, and I was thinking, it's like because we did like a fucking women's circle, like women's business almost, like that used to be a thing where like, Indigenous women still, like Aboriginal women do that a lot, where they have women's business. And we used to have like witches or people that there's still like communities at the moment that do like celebration of the cycle, like your menstruation, and there's so many. I haven't seen too many that exist for men, but my mum just came back from one in Uluru literally like 2 days ago. Some spiritual women's thing. So it's funny how that is really appealing to us and enjoyable, and I experienced that myself, that afterwards I didn't even do, like, it wasn't even about the tarot cards. It was just about, like, we were all, like, sitting meditating for a minute, and we all, like, you always feel, like, high afterwards. It was so, like, euphoric, and such a unique experience that they were like, oh, I never get to experience things like that. And you can see, like, how impactful it could be for someone to be sitting in a church where they are so in that moment and believing it, or a temple or whatever.
Absolutely.
And the group rapport. It's amazing.
I saw an interesting take online where she was talking about the way often people go to. She was Indian, and she said there's a lot of people who go to India to go on a spiritual journey and really get immersed in the culture and the spirituality and the Hinduism. And her take, which was quite funny, was imagine if Indian people did the same thing to white people's spirituality. I go to like a Baptist church and, you know, go to Hillsong and then talk about it as though it's a deep, meaningful experience. And what I find particularly interesting is that in the West there has been this mass turning away from the traditional Western forms of spirituality and religion, and then this new awakening towards these Eastern forms of religion and spirituality. But a lot of the things that made people turn away from those Western ideas of spirituality and religion are it's not like they don't exist in, particularly in, I can't speak for indigenous spirituality and their ethical codes, but in Hinduism, what do they say? The husband is like God, and they're not particularly fond of LGBT either. Yeah. So many of the reasons that people turned away from religion here still exist in many of these new forms of spirituality and religion that they're turning to.
Acknowledging that this is Eastern philosophy and Eastern medicine, and like people like put you wouldn't believe how often I see on Facebook when someone's kid is sick and they say put onions at the bottom of their feet and stuff like that. But it's no one wants to acknowledge where these ideas actually are coming from.
Yeah, and the parts of those ideas that are also not in line with the current code of ethics that has developed in the more secular world. You know, it's the same thing where, like, I know a lot of this comes from a place of wanting to mollify some of the discrimination that certain countries have exhibited in the past, but you know, and this is a strong theme in my comedy, but I always think it's interesting how people will go after Christians and Christianity a lot, but they'll never go after Islam. And in many ways, particularly in some of the more modern conceptions of Islam, their anti-LGBT rhetoric is far stronger, and they're quite harsh towards that particular community. And I understand it's probably like just deeply uncomfortable for people to do it because they think, all right, how much of this is me being potentially racist? But it's a very interesting. I just find it very particularly interesting that there are a cadre of more modern, enlightened people that will be very reticent to accept traditional Western forms of spirituality and religion, but then be very inclusive towards Eastern or other religious ideas, which often do have facets that may not align with progressive notions of ethics. And then one thing I wanted to ask you about as well is I saw a clip that was from Q&A, and there was someone talking about how women in the women's movement today is sort of measuring their success based on how men used to measure their success. So like, okay, how many of us can we get into CEO positions? How many of us can earn as much as a man or out earn a man? And her point was, okay, we need to we need to measure success based on our own success. And, you know, why shouldn't it be that the woman who might be a housewife or has had 3 children and may not be particularly successful in her career, is that not a form of success? And the clip went semi-viral. I might not be articulating it as well as I can, but I think the basic gist is there. What do you think about something like that?
Yeah, I 100% completely agree with, like, it's really hard to talk about because you don't want to come across saying like feminism hasn't been 100% amazing or whatever. But I flip-flop even just myself between both of those parties, where one part of me is like, I want to earn a lot of money. I want to be very successful. I want to own my own business. I want to be the CEO or whatever. And even just being on mat leave, like, I struggle sometimes with those thoughts being like, oh, I should be back at work and I should be like succeeding more. Like, I've taken such a big step back, taking a year off doing nothing. But then, and I have to like check myself and be like, this has literally been the best year of my life.
It's interesting as well that you'd say something like, use the phrase doing nothing when you've probably worked quite
and there it
hard.
is again. My own internalized misogyny. Like, exactly. I'm not doing nothing, doing so much. You're raising a child, managing a household, blah, blah, blah. But yeah, it's like we have developed such a culture of feeling like if you're not contributing to the finances or career in society, then you're lesser than or not as successful. And I think it's really a harmful thing. And we, of course, need to define our own versions of what success is. But it seems to be a really common thing that people define success as what the materialistic, like, well, I've got a lot of money and I've got a nice house or whatever. Like, that's how I can feel successful. So that's sad. And then I think about it as well, like the clients I work with, and their definition of success is safety, or having a functional relationship, or having a meal. And it's so different across the board. So yeah, I do think those things can be, obviously it's beneficial at times, but also harmful. And it's sad how much gender has an influence in these things, and the patriarchy, whatever, like, about our ideas of success. Yeah, it's a rabbit hole.
Yeah. And then there's elements there where you have new cult-ish leaders merging now on I guess, there's male red pill space as well. And there's a religious-like following around that where, you know, any kind of criticism towards them is seen as someone who's whatever, part of the matrix, or, you know, whatever you want to call it. And that's what happens when people are void of meaning. They fall for these cult-like charismatic leaders. And politics as well becomes the realm of the spiritual. And it's not about, okay, let me just rationally try and decide who's got the best policies here that are going to not just benefit me, but are going to be great for the country long term. It's, okay, who do I emotionally connect with? And who's representing me, and who's my team, and who's my tribe. I think that's very unhealthy in the world of politics, because politics should be as secular and as just rational as possible. There's always going to be some degree of that, but I think we see more of that. I mean, like, you know, Trump is basically a religious figure to many Americans, and you cannot really get that out of him. But then he's also the devil to many Americans, and it's he has brought about this kind of almost religious either obsession of him, or religious just absolutely anything he could possibly do is irredeemably evil. And we're seeing that not so much in Australian politics yet, but I have a suspicion we could get to that point soon. You know, celebrities and musicians have a very I've always thought that I've never really gone to a music festival, and every time I see footage of a music festival, I think about footage I've seen from a big Hillsong convention, and I'm like, the music festival looks far more cult-like than the Hillsong convention, because there's these lasers, there's this light show, everyone's bobbing their head, and
Yeah,
let's be
in
honest, probably on
unison.
drugs, having a religious tribal
Yeah,
type experience. They're all in unison. They're all mimicking the sounds of the purveyor of that emotion, and they're seeing someone that they deeply admire and means a lot to them. And for a long time, celebrity, and this really started in the 60s, and even before that a little bit, that entertainers became the new religious figures.
yeah, yes, that's so true. And I think as well now that when people aren't searching for something outwardly, there is that they're either one completely numb to everything and not doing things and just trying to find empty ways to fulfill themselves, like we said, like through materialism, etc. Or otherwise they're so hyper fixated on themselves and their psychology and their own individual journey that it becomes it's almost like you develop a narcissistic view of self where everything is about how you impact this person or how this impacts you or whatever, and you never think outside of yourself and understand other people or really connecting with them as well while you're on your own spiritual journey. It's funny how it's like we're all in some way meeting that need, but some are healthier and some are not. And it's so important to think, okay, this is an actual biological, innate human need within us. How are you meeting it? What are you doing? Are you doing nothing other than sitting on your couch consuming porn and fatty food or whatever, or alcohol or drugs to feel something?
Because then you'll get hooked by a cult leader, and you won't realize it's because what you said earlier, like how everyone thinks there's no way I'm too smart to fall for a cult leader. You don't realize it happens slowly. It's not like the first day at the cult they're like, hey, drink the virgin's blood. They tell you how amazing you are, and they probably give you food, and they probably are very generous to you, and then it's like 3 months in, all right, you got to run around naked, or you got to do something a bit weird, but you're like, okay, this is a community that loves me, I trust them, I'm going to do it. And then who was it? There's a good comedian, I've forgotten who it was, but they it's such a funny joke. It's like every cult just ends up in the guy having a harem of women that he sleeps with every single one. It's either that or it's a mass suicide cult. And his joke was like, all right, if I can't sleep with them all, we're all just gonna die. And it's dark joke, but very, very funny. And to end on maybe a slightly lighter note, do you remember that actress from Smallville, Alison Mack?
Oh yeah.
And then that interview I saw with her talking to that guy who was in that cult. I forget what it was called. It was one in Hollywood. They're all in California, in America. And, there's cults still operating today. This is Joe Rogan now, but there's a cult still operating today. And I have never seen such a grown adult, extremely successful. The way she was just transfixed to this guy who was just, he's not...
Nixon.
He's just somewhat handsome. He didn't
cult.
look particularly... But she's very attractive, still, I'm sure a very intelligent woman, and she's there just looking like a giggling schoolgirl talking to this guy and tweeting at other female celebrities saying like, she didn't directly say join my cult, but, come and I'm going to introduce you to some people and she'd cloak it in this kind of language like it's an empowered network.
Yeah.
So... the language used was very secular.
Yeah, and then people respected her as a celebrity. So they're like, okay, there must be something special about this. And then it became like this pyramid scheme of sex work. Remember when they were texting being like, you need to remove your underwear, you need to do this, you need to have sex. Everyone had like a subordinate or someone below them, and they would text them demands, and then that person would text someone else demands. It was like, it's crazy.
Always comes down to something sexual and about power. Let's be honest, every religion too.
Everything is about sex and power.
Everything is about sex. And, that's what it comes down
literally.
to.
Literally. Yeah. But you never know. Like things like that get, like you said, it's it's so easy to say you never do it, but you have like, you go in and you have this amazing experience. Like I remember when I was, I think I talked about this recently, so sorry for being repetitive, but when I was studying life coaching, and we did I think it was like when I was doing hypnosis or something, and the instructors wanted to talk, like show us how it feels, like other ways to transcend and be in a state of hypnosis outside of doing hypnotism. And he created, like he put us in a sweat lodge, which is like, I think it's Native American, like a tent where you increase the heat massively. And I believe traditionally you're probably taking drugs or whatever. I actually don't know how it works traditionally, which is probably bad. But so we're all in here, it's steaming hot, and we've all closed our eyes, and this guy's literally putting like hypnosis, which is essentially he was putting us in a state of meditation and suggesting things to us. And I've never touched drugs in my life, but I swear to God, I had the craziest trip of my life. I didn't know that I was sitting down anymore. I thought I was floating through space. I didn't know where I was. I didn't know what was up. I didn't know what was down. I was just literally floating amongst the stars until he ended it. And it was the wildest thing I had ever experienced sober. And then I looked around and everyone around me was like, holy fucking shit. And then immediately I was like, I respect this guy. Let's do it again. Like, it was crazy. And like, you can understand it. Like, you have that one thing and you're like, hang on. Like, what if he had, I mean, hopefully I wouldn't be this susceptible to it, but what if he had told me that that wasn't just a transcending meditation technique or hypnosis technique, that was God speaking through me or whatever? Because I felt in that moment, I wasn't sitting in a chair. Like, I would be like, if he had told me that, I might have been like, oh, actually, yeah, because I was fucking floating. That's not normal. You know,
Yeah.
like makes sense why people think, what is it, Scientology, they believe like the giant lizards or something, or I can't remember, like come out and destroy the world. I can't remember, but it's weird.
There's something called the stoned ape hypothesis, which posits that 70 or so thousand years ago, our ancestors then discovered mushrooms or whatever. And then for a couple of generations, all that they just consumed tons of mushrooms. And that's what evolved our brain to have this spiritual need or to have this, abstract spiritual essence that's our big thing. We don't necessarily, because Neanderthals actually had a bigger brain than us, but we were able to coalesce in larger groups and think abstractly. And that was how we eventually let's be honest, took over the world. Because we're not the strongest animal. We may not even be the smartest, but we had the ability to think abstractly and think and have this kind of spiritual element to the way we thought. And
isn't that fascinating if that's like accurate, and just think like how everything in nature plays a role? And here I am getting spiritual, but like, it's wow, mushrooms, like
it's a hypothesis.
Potentially evolved. Yeah.
But it's pretty
That's
funny
wild.
when you're the stoned ape.
Yeah.
Well, food for thought to think about in this one. I thought that was a really good one. That was one of my favorites. I hope you guys liked it too. And do you have any final thoughts? Anything to say?
Literally not one thought can come to my head right now. My brain is exploding.
Fair enough. Hope you guys liked that one. Share the podcast. Give us a good review. If you didn't like it, don't leave a review. And follow us on socials. And we will see you next time.